In the tortured internecine politics of the Middle East, there's one issue that reverberates around the world: the recognition of Palestine.
The question of Palestine.
They recognise the state of Palestine.
The status of Palestine has been a topic of debate since the creation of Israel after World War II. That was an attempt to give Jews a homeland after centuries of persecution, culminating in the Holocaust. Palestinians and their supporters say that's left thousands of people adrift in their own ancestral lands. In 1947, the United Nations agreed to split a tiny slice of the Levant, which both Christians and Muslims regard as the Holy Land, into a Jewish and a Muslim state, Israel and Palestine. Conflict has raged, off and on, ever since. It took until 1988 for Palestine to be officially declared a state by its own leadership.
We want to live in peace with all our neighbours, including the Israelis.
And it's still not regarded as an independent country by many nations. And Australia does not recognise a Palestinian state. Instead, Australia's official position is that we support a two-state solution. That's the idea that both Israel and Palestine agree to respect a shared boundary. The Arabs want Israel to withdraw from territories it occupied in 1967. The Israelis say they never will. And there it's been stuck for decades. This fight has also raged for decades within the Australian Labor Party. Many on Labor's left want to recognise Palestine. Many on the right believe this would be a betrayal of Israel and would put us at odds with our allies, like the UK. And every time there's a national Labor conference, the issue boils to the surface.
The local Palestinian population would like an independent state, and everybody thinks that's a good idea.
Greg Sheridan is our foreign editor.
The problem is Israel and the Palestinians haven't been able to negotiate a state which would leave Israel secure and would be within reasonable borders for the Palestinians. And the international left despises Israel and construes it, I think, very inaccurately as an expression of Western colonial power in the Middle East, and absolutely hates Israel. And the Australian left is tremendously derivative. It just copies whatever's happening on the international left. So it's made a Palestinian state its cause célèbre. The particular motion that the left wants in the Labor Party platform is that it should recognise Palestine as a state and by a certain date. Well, of course, that doesn't make any sense because a state has to have control over its own borders, and the Palestinian Authority certainly doesn't do that. And the way Labor governments normally fudge it is to say, yes, we will recognise a Palestinian state when the conditions are right. And there's no prospect of the conditions being right anytime soon.
Something fascinating is happening within the Labor Party. Its left wing is on the ascendant. Labor, like every group of human beings, is a collection of factions. And there are almost as many factions as there are ideas to argue about. There's the Victorian left, which is aligned to the famously hardcore construction unions. There are other left sub-factions which are closer to the Greens in policy areas like abortion rights and free education for all. The New South Wales right, which is notoriously ruthless, is much more keen on free market economics than the rest of the party and tends to be a lot more socially conservative on issues like euthanasia. On some issues, the right is closer to the Nationals than to the rest of Labor. Conference is where all the fighting happens. In the past, on issues like climate policy and marriage equality. Sometimes it's moving, like Penny Wong's 2015 plea for marriage equality.
Thank you, delegates. I don't think I've had a prouder day as a member of the Labor Party.
Sometimes it's fiery.
From today, the free ride is over.
We never have given automatic preferences to the Greens political party, and we never should.
You're allowed to disagree and you're allowed after to move on, but you can't leave the territory littered with vitriol.
But I don't agree with you on some issues, comrade. We should never have a fetish for a surplus.
And sometimes it's just weird, like Julia Gillard's 2011 plea for unity.
This is the Labor way. This is the Australian way. We follow it simply because we are us.
At this year's national conference, scheduled for mid-August in Brisbane, for the first time in 70 years, the left will have the majority of delegates. They've also got a Prime Minister in Anthony Albanese, who's from the left, only the second PM since the 60s, from that side of the party. These factional nuances are important because National Conference sets the party platform, the list of policies that Labor expects its elected politicians to adhere to. That's why National Conference tends to be full of drama. People get up and make impassioned speeches about this or that. In 2021, there were dramatic speeches about recognising Palestine, and despite the strong objections of the right, the left prevailed and the party passed a motion in support of it.
Nothing, not a single molecule of the physical universe will change in Palestine or Israel because Australia does or doesn't recognise a Palestinian state. But it's the sort of symbolism which motivates the left-wing mind. That's the sort of stuff it loves. And it's based on an extraordinarily simplistic analysis which ignores all the times Israel has tried to produce the conditions for a Palestinian state. But it's not just a question of Israel getting out of the occupied territories. The Palestinians have to establish a democratic polity within their own territories. They have to promise that that is the end of their claims against Israel, that they're not after the rest of Jerusalem or the rest of Israel or anything like that. And they have to promise an end to violence against Israel. And the Palestinian leader who does that will almost certainly be murdered by extremists on his own side. And no Palestinian leader has been brave enough to do it. It just can't be done. That's not to say Israel is blameless, but there's nothing that Australia can do about this. It's a ridiculous issue for the Australian left to be obsessed with. And if they force the Albanese government to extend diplomatic recognition to a state which doesn't exist, they would just make the Albanese government look foolish and damage our relations with Israel, which is a significant democratic ally of Australia.
Coming up, what else Labor is brawling about and what it means for the government. Anthony Albanese is all in on the US alliance and the deal to buy billions of dollars worth of submarines from Britain and America.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You are the best. You're the best. And we're going to be the best in the world, the three of us. Thank you all very, very much.
But not everyone in Labor is so keen, and there's frantic backroom work underway to ensure Labor's conference doesn't result in an embarrassing snub to the AUKUS treaty deal. Victoria's powerful unions are likely to vote in support of a motion against the AUKUS treaty. They made a first attempt at the Victorian conference back in June, and it'll likely come up again at Labor's national conference in August.
If a motion were to get passed which repudiated the AUKUS deal or said we could never have nuclear-powered submarines, that would be a massive embarrassment for the Albanese government. And the Albanese government would either have to defy the Labor National Conference or it would have to break off out of the AUKUS agreement, which could well mean the end of the US alliance. Now, the Labor left has done this quite a few times in history. There were periods when it was within a few votes of requiring the Federal Labor Party to expel all American facilities from Australia, such as the Pine Gap Communications Facility, or to prevent American nuclear-powered ships from visiting our ports. Either of those would have seen the end of the American alliance. Bill Hayden is very funny about this in his memoirs. He says, when confronted with a choice between the Labor Party and the American alliance, the Australian people will choose the American alliance every single time, without a minute's hesitation.
AUKUS has two powerful Labor critics, former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr and former PM Paul Keating.
I think there's been a very baleful influence by Paul Keating here. The nuclear-powered submarines do not carry nuclear weapons and will make no contribution to nuclear proliferation whatsoever. They greatly enhance Australia's sovereignty and power because they give us a more formidable defence force. I mean, part of the submarine debate has become ridiculous, as though the argument is between conventional submarines, which would only defend our coastline, and nuclear submarines, which will annoy China by getting up close to it. This completely misunderstands the nature of submarines. Submarines are an asymmetric weapon because the enemy doesn't know where they are. And the Collins-class submarine already is the conventional submarine with the longest range in the world, and they have the potential to strike from anywhere. So the nuclear-powered submarine is simply an infinitely better version of what we already have. But if the Labor Party conference passed a motion, that would be a repudiation of its own government. I don't think there's any chance that they would pass such a motion. There is quite a chance that they will put such a motion, and even putting such a motion embarrasses the government, diminishes the alliance, and allows the Liberal opposition to say, you guys aren't safe on security.
Labor for Refugees, another left group, wants the party to condemn offshore processing and close the Nauru detention centre.
So Australia typically is very generous to refugees. We have a very big refugee program, and so we should. We're a very rich nation. We should take in a lot of refugees. But the Australian people are absolutely committed to the idea that we decide who comes into the country, that you don't just get to turn up on a boat and then you can stay forever in Australia. And if you did that, you would have tens or indeed hundreds of thousands of people arriving in Australia by boat, and most of them would not be authentic political refugees. Now, if the Labor left forces the Albanese government to dismantle the effective deterrent system that Australia has, which stops illegal immigration, they will, as sure as night follows day, start up the illegal immigrant trade again. You will get a surge of illegal immigrants, and Labor will be thrown out of office. Labor has had this fight at its national conference before, and it's defeated the left on this. And the left is kind of quite crazy at the moment because no boats are coming now. So no one is detained, or almost no one is detained. So, of course, the left can't bear to see anything that works and not disturb it. You know, the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The left's view is that's all very well in practice, but it doesn't work in theory. So we're going to bugger up the practice to conform to the theory.
Greg Sheridan is The Australian's foreign editor. Thanks for joining us on The Front. You can check out all Australia's best journalism anytime at theaustralian.com.au.